accanto alla tua ispirazione, perché sono felice di dare per i temi dei quali sono ispirato. Ecco, spiegato. Mio buon Critone, dobbiamo un gallo ad Esculappio, non lo dimenticare.
The last words of Socrates established themselves as a blind spot in philosophy. All texts of Plato are discussed hundreds if not thousands of times, but the final words of Socrates stay as either unimportant or are already assumed to be not deep enough to discuss in depth. If you put this into the context of the history of philosophy, it's quite weird, because exactly these last moments of Socrates' life establish what his legacy is supposed to be. Ruthless questioning of your own ideals and the ideas of others. The breaking of mental barriers, without ever stopping, no matter under what threat. The last words of Socrates, in the public eye at least, show nothing of that sadly. There is nothing left of content, simply some vague cool quotes of, he questioned authority, he was so stoic. None of these come even close to how important his legacy is, and how important the context of his last words was. And even if, the modern importance is ignored for comforting complacency.
Κρήτον, το ασκληπιό οφείλομαι να λετριώνα, απόδοτε και μία μελίσσετε.
It can also be translated to, we owe a debt to Asclepius, but then we already reach tonations that most translators would like to avoid. Also, the final part can and is more literally translated to, do it and don't do the opposite, which is a traditional Greek phrasing which we often see used in early rhetoric writings, and especially Plato. The big interpretation and revival of the topic was started by religious researcher and sociologist Georges Duhamel, or however you pronounce that, and a lot of what I'm writing here can be traced back to his thoughts. In a moment of Socrates' death, he scolds his pupils to sacrifice a chicken, which means in Greek pagan tradition that you thank Asclepius, that he got healed of something. To give an easy example, if you had a cold in ancient Greece and you recovered and healed, you sacrifice a chicken for Asclepius, to say thanks for the healing process. The important part here is that Duhamel emphasizes that we speak of an actual healing process that happened, not some distant mythical thing, or that he actually physically got healed. And right here is where the pop philosophy and common interpretation of the scene starts. Alphonse de Lamartine tries to solve this great riddle for what depth Socrates is sacrificing the chicken over by saying he's being healed of life, thereby using a late Stoic view of existence and the body. Burnett boils this down even further into meaninglessness, claiming that death was something similar to falling asleep and waking up is simply the healthy response. Thereby sacrificing a chicken, Socrates would hope for a healthy reawakening. All of these interpretations don't have much depth and show a fundamental lack of understanding of Greek philosophy, but there is one philosopher who surprisingly goes along with Lamartine's analysis, but actually offers some depth alongside with it. This philosopher is named Friedrich Nietzsche. Dieses lächerliche und furchtbare letzte Wort heißt für den, der Ohren hat: O Kriton, das Leben ist eine Krankheit. Ist es möglich, ein Mann wie er, der heiter und vor aller Augen wie ein Soldat gelebt hat, war Pessimist? Er hatte eben nur eine gute Miene zum Leben gemacht und zeitlebens sein letztes Urteil, sein innerstes Gefühl versteckt. Sokrates, Sokrates, hat am Leben gelitten. Und er hat noch seine Rache dafür genommen, mit jenem verhüllten, schauerlichen, frommen und blasphemischen Worte. Musste ein Sokrates sich auch noch rächen? War ein Gran Großmut zu wenig für seine überreichende Tugend? Ach Freunde, wir müssen auch die Griechen überwinden. That Nietzsche goes along with his interpretation makes us expect more legitimacy in his reasoning, and it's not as simple as Lamartine's. Nietzsche doesn't buy the pop philosopher's take on the heroic stoic view of seeing life as a sickness. Nietzsche is very much aware of the paradox that is in Socrates' soldier-like life of philosophy to the sad analysis of his last words. Nietzsche takes the bravery to conclude this to its sad end. The fact that Socrates refuted his entire life work with his final words. Lamartine does not misunderstand the last words of Socrates, in Nietzsche's opinion, but he misunderstands the context and therefore the importance of it. The horrible sin that dragged itself along pop culture around the death of Socrates is the picture of the Stoic philosopher and the fetishization of Stoicism. The mortal world is not a negative, life is not a sin, and life is not a disease for the father of philosophy. Life is not a prison with the higher entities acting as correctional officers, but life is more like a positive caretaking of a family father. For Socrates, we live in the realm of being cared for, and for that reason, suicide is wrong. It would be stupid to let this privilege fade out. Thereby, the idea of the sad sickness of life makes no sense in the context of the Greeks. When Plato writes about Socrates, it becomes clear that Socrates has no distaste of the material world. He speaks of disconnecting himself from the bodily urges, not from the earthly realm. Nietzsche, therefore noticing the discrepancy, calls Socrates out and says it's a revelation he was hiding the entire time. There are some other, more boring interpretations, for example that the chicken sacrifice comes from Persian mythology, where the chicken leads you into the afterlife, but even then, this was a very old myth, and attributing that to the Greek philosophers in his final moments seems rather unlikely. So let's return to Duzimil. He first of all takes some steps back. He admits that it's about sickness. Second, he throws away minor interpretations, like he just randomly said it, or the Persian throw-in. But he also throws away Nietzschean interpretations. Socrates didn't turn weak, but said something that is the most essential to his philosophy. Duzimil notices a repetition and shifts the focus to the person addressed in these final moments, Kriton. Socrates, in his final words, never spoke of the I, but of the we, and this includes the role of Kriton in the build-up to his death. Kriton tried to organize an escape for Socrates, but after Socrates declined, Kriton first said how Socrates is betraying himself by stopping his journey for wisdom for death. Then he mentions that Socrates is betraying his children, and that means his pupils, by not being able to take care of them. And then the social element sets in. He mentions that Socrates is betraying his friends and puts great shame onto them, because the people will think that Socrates' friends let him die, and didn't do everything in their power to save him. Thereby Socrates' death is not a punishment for Socrates alone, but for Kriton and his circles. This is what Socrates then responds to. If you ask for advice for gymnastics, would you take advice from everyone? If you follow a bad diet, your body will degrade and fall apart. Same if you follow advice of people who do not know good or evil, or just and unjust. You will degrade and deteriorate, or in Old Greek the word diaphatarmenon. The conclusion Socrates seeks out of this is not to worry about the opinion of the masses, but only on that which is true, but not in the classic context of what is truth, but truth as a goal, as something that needs to be produced, constructed and achieved. You're not supposed to worry about the masses, but worry about yourself. The opinion of the masses is like a disease, it deteriorates itself. What Kriton is supposed to be grateful for in the healing process is that he surpassed getting rotted away by the masses. The reason why this is special beyond its appliance is that it is not spoken of wrong or right opinion, but about a disease and an infectious opinion. In this context, truth is not related to some absolute, but a constructed internal process coming out of the worry of oneself.
Ταύτα διείποντος αυτού ο Κρήτον. Ή ενέφη ο Σόκρατες, τι δε τούτης η εμή επιστέλης, ή περί των παιδων, ή περί άλλου του. Ό,τι εν σοι ποιούντες ημείς, εν χάρετη μάλιστα ποιήμεν. Άπερα ηλέγω έφη ο Κρήτον, ουδέν καινότερον, ότι ημών αυτόν επιμελούμενοι ημείς και ημί και της εμείς και ημίν, αυτής εν χάρετη ποιήσετε. Άτιον ποιείτε, καν μην είναι ομολογήσετε. Εάν δε ημών μεν αυτόν εμελείτε και μη θελείτε ως περκατήχνη κατά τα νύντα ηρημένα και τα εν το έμπροσθεν χρονοζήν, ουδέαν πολλά ομολογήσετε.
But this brings up another point. If it is Kriton who was infected by this, why is Socrates speaking of the we? He should be saying, "Oh Kriton, you owe Asklepios a chicken." Duzemil proposes this. First of all, he makes clear that there obviously is a close bond between the pupils and Socrates, so when one suffers a disease, all of them are affected by it. But this alone would seem like a cop-out. The more important note is that Socrates also got cured of the temptation to escape with Kriton. The reason why he wants the chicken to be sacrificed after his death is because only then, when he lived his final moments, did Socrates truly overcome the temptation of escaping. So with the establishment of Duzemil, which leads us to an understanding of the situation, Foucault comes in with an understanding of the actual context. Earlier in his death, when his pupils said what they should do, what his legacy should be, he responds with, "As always, take care of yourselves. Hymon, auton, epilemunoi." Or better translated, to worry about yourself. Remember the term epilemunoi, it's gonna be important later. This is not meant in the casual sense, but it's the entire life philosophy of Socrates. Socrates speaks about the ability of introspection and meta-thinking, the thinking about your thinking. What he tried to accomplish in his life is to make people question their thoughts, and that's also what he died for. If he wants to be remembered for one thing, if he wants to leave his legacy in one sentence, it is the act of questioning yourself. Here comes another philosopher named Michel Foucault. Foucault doesn't care too much about the chicken anymore. If this sacrifice is a psychological, medical or political move is quite irrelevant. The addressing of this, overcoming himself, addressed as a disease, cured by epilemunoi, by the act of paresia, is way more interesting. Epilemunoi and the worry about oneself is the ideal state that everyone should be constantly going through to achieve truth. But sadly, this is not always the case. Not everyone is constantly questioning themselves and their core beliefs. This is where Foucault opens another chapter with the Greek process of parrhesia. Parrhesia is the process of speaking truth to another person. This is often associated with a social risk. An easy example is a servant or an advisor speaking a hard truth to a king so the king can self-reflect upon one of his beliefs even if the servant has a risk of repercussions. Epimelumenoi is the ideal and parrhesia is the step towards vérité, which in French just means truth. But Foucault uses the term in focus on the social processes towards and around truth. Therefore, in this spectrum of thought, parrhesia and epilumenoi are both working processes needed for each other to produce vérité. Epimelumenoi is the foundational ideal that has its internal limits. No matter how great you are, you'll reach your limit at one point where you can't break your internal walls anymore. Or even worse, you might not even know them. So when this happens, parrhesia comes in and starts that motion up again. And here is where it gets really interesting. Foucault's subject term is one of utter meaninglessness and with no agency over power through all of his works. But in his lectures around bravery to truth, this changes. Bravery to Truth was written close to his death, so his research never really finished around this topic. But one thing became clear. In this process of creation of truth, in this truth of discourse, the subject certainly has more authority than any previous reading of Foucault would imply. An explanation of power in Foucault would require another video. But here we finally give the subject some almost revolutionary spirit, some taste, some minor grasp of agency in this power system that we are so stuck in. Through this motion of discourse, which Socrates already 2000 years ago died for. I'll do this part without a script simply because it's way easier, and second of all, I do not really know how to script this part. Either way, the point of this whole process of discourse is that we come to an achievement that we can actually break out of the premises that for example, the neoliberal system offers us. This leads to a process of political radicalization. If you question all the foundations that liberalism, for example, offers you, for example, human rights, democracy, all these very basic things that are not very stable if you start to question them, lead to a very strong process of radicalization. We are aware of this. Everybody knows who refute these things, knows that an internal process is able to do that. The more important stuff is how we handle the discourse of this, because if you bring this to its logical conclusion, it could imply oh, well, this libertarian view of let's just debate every person in the world. And if we debate and offer poesia to every single person, then they will come to our ideal political system, which is complete bullshit. Like Socrates said, you cannot care about the masses too much because they are like a disease. To bring this in a very practical phrasing, you can't offer poesia or you can't debate 300 million people in America, for example. Thereby, what poesia should be concluded with is not some democratic mass appeal solution, but you should see it as a reminder to constantly question also your comrades, the people that are close to you, the people that are radicalized with you. The most important thing of any radical group is that they are stable mentally. If you have a comrade and he's your best friend and he can shoot weapons, all that kind of stuff, it's completely useless if he has a swastika on his forehead if he does not know why he has it on his forehead. If someone is a Marxist-Leninist and pretends he cares about anti-imperialism and he wants to fucking kill every single capitalist in the world, completely useless if he gets pushed over if somebody just asks him why. You need to make sure that the introspection is constant. There is never a stable foundation to anything, at least on an internal process. Of course, you can make political compromises. For example, you should not talk yourself, you should not quote-unquote debate your group apart. You can make compromise. The point is to make compromises until you have actual stability. Never stop that introspection, because that introspection is your key to radicalization. Without poesia, without epilemunoia, however the fuck it is pronounced, these two things are what makes you a political radical. These two things are what makes you a revolutionary and an insurrectionary, or whatever term you want to use. Guns, politics, economics, manifestos are all secondary to the space process, because only through the space process will you be even aware of them. Earlier I mentioned the internal walls you have to break in, and sometimes you're not even aware of them. How would you get access to books like Siege or Das Kapital if you are not even socially aware of the need for those? This need is created by social discourse. This need is created by confrontation. So, do you think the average soccer mom will ever read Das Kapital? Of course she won't, because she has no need to. She's comfortable, she's complacent, she has no discourse confrontation. But if you actually force people into this mindset of confrontation, where they feel the need, where they are aware, okay, fuck, there is a gigantic mental barrier here, there is a massive cognitive dissonance here that I have to fucking overcome, then they realize that problem. So you can work with that. And this is exactly what this video is supposed to show. Make yourself socially aware of the barriers you have. If you are a Nazi, try to actually confront yourself with Marxism, and not with Marxism that a right-winger tells you. A right-winger who's telling you about Marxism is not telling you about Marxism. If you're a leftist and you have some basic notion that these Nazis might be more edgier than you thought, well, maybe get yourself educated about them. Maybe not from your Discord Marxist-Leninist Maoist circle jerk. Actually try to confront yourself. Maybe you become a better radical out of that. That's what Socrates died for. If the most important father of philosophy chose his last words, you can believe that they were not chosen meaninglessly. And if there's one mental role model to live by, I don't think Socrates would be a bad choice. And Socrates in his last moments should not be devalued, but valued higher than most philosophers in their entire existence.
And you even spoke to me and said, if you're so funny, then why are you on your